A warm evening in Los Angeles framed the sparkling lights of an upscale restaurant in the heart of the city. Hannah Collins nervously adjusted the hem of her simple blue dress and glanced down at her comfortable shoes, which seemed completely out of place in the luxurious setting. Women in designer outfits and men in expensive suits passed by, making Hannah feel out of place amidst all this glamour. "Olivia, why did I listen to you?" she muttered quietly to herself. Her younger sister had insisted that Hannah go on a blind date. "You need to break out of your routine. You can't bury yourself in work at your veterinary clinic forever," Olivia had argued. Taking a deep breath, Hannah hesitantly stepped inside. The soft glow of chandeliers, shimmering glass tables, and the quiet clinking of glasses immediately caught her eye. She slowly scanned the room until her gaze landed on a man sitting at a distant table. Tall, with perfectly styled hair and a dark navy suit, he was thoughtfully scrolling through his phone. That must be Mark, Hannah thought, recalling the name of her date. Her hesitation gave way to necessity, and she started toward him. "Hi, are you Mark?" she asked with a smile, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The man looked up, slightly surprised, but quickly masked it with a light, almost disarming smile. In truth, this was Dylan Hayes, the CEO of an international investment company. Just an hour earlier, an important business meeting had been abruptly cancelled, leaving him stuck in this restaurant, pondering how to spend his evening. When Hannah appeared before him with such a sincere and slightly awkward smile, Dylan felt something unusual stir within him. Normally, people around him only saw a powerful businessman or a potential partner. But this girl, she had simply mistaken him for someone else. In that moment, he was intrigued. Why not play along? His evening was suddenly free, and he felt an unexpected urge to step outside his usual routine. "Well, you could say that," he replied, closing his phone and setting it aside. Relieved, Hannah smiled and sat down across from him. The conversation flowed naturally. She talked about her work as a veterinarian, about the stray animals she sometimes brought home, and her dream of opening a rehabilitation center for rescued animals. Dylan listened with unexpected attentiveness. He was used to cold negotiations, cynical people, and tough deals in the world of big investments. But this girl, with her sincere eyes and bright smile, was completely different. Her voice carried genuine care, and her eyes lit up when she spoke about animals. Dylan was surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. He didn't correct her assumption about his name. Something about her simplicity and sincerity stopped him. After all, his evening was free, the meeting was cancelled. Why not indulge in this little game? At that moment, he felt a strange yet pleasant warmth, as if something real had suddenly burst into his cold, calculating world. And he decided not to ruin that moment. The conversation with Hannah flowed so effortlessly that even Dylan was surprised at himself. He was used to tense discussions behind closed doors, where every word was carefully calculated, and any pause could cost millions. But here, everything was different. Hannah spoke about her work as a veterinarian with such enthusiasm that Dylan caught himself genuinely interested in listening. "Sometimes I feel like animals understand more than people," Hannah smiled, wrapping her fingers around a cup of tea. "They feel pain, but they don't hold grudges. I dream of opening a rehabilitation center for stray animals, but it's so complicated. Funding, finding a place." Dylan smirked slightly. For him, solving problems like that would take just a couple of phone calls. But he didn't interrupt. He listened. "Do you work in finance?" Hannah suddenly asked, nodding at his perfectly tailored suit. Dylan hesitated for a second. This was his chance to clear things up, to say he wasn't Mark at all. But instead, he simply nodded. "Yeah, something like that," he replied vaguely. Hannah smiled, not noticing anything odd. At that moment, Dylan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His assistant Grace had sent a reminder about an upcoming business meeting, which had already been cancelled. Dylan paused. If that meeting hadn't fallen through, he would have left by now. But instead, he was sitting across from a girl who had mistaken him for someone else, and for some reason, he had no desire to correct her. He turned off the screen and set the phone aside. "Sorry, work. It doesn't leave me alone even on weekends," he chuckled. Hannah nodded in understanding. "I get it. Only my patients are furry and have tails," she laughed, and her laughter was so genuine that Dylan felt the tension in his shoulders melt away. They continued talking. Dylan spun stories about fictional work situations, skillfully avoiding details that could expose him. Hannah, in turn, shared stories about animals, rescued puppies, and the volunteers who helped her. At one point, Hannah glanced at her phone and paled. A new message blinked on the screen. "Hey! I'm already at the table by the window. Mark." Hannah tightened her grip on the phone, then slowly lifted her eyes to Dylan. You're not Mark," her voice trembled. Dylan looked at her calmly. "No, I'm not Mark," he said quietly. Hannah abruptly stood up, nervously smoothing her dress. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I got everything mixed up." Her face burned with embarrassment. "Wait," Dylan rose slightly from his seat. "This was nice. Really." But Hannah was already hurrying away, hiding her face in her hands. She practically ran out of the restaurant, vanishing into the bustling Los Angeles evening. Dylan remained seated, thoughtfully staring into his empty cup. He wasn't upset. More than anything, he was intrigued. This girl had stirred something real in him, something long forgotten. He leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a faint smile. "Well then, Miss Collins, looks like I'll have to find you." Dylan sat at the table, lazily running his finger along the rim of his wine glass. Hannah had disappeared, leaving behind a faint scent of jasmine and a lingering sense of something left unsaid. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled heavily. Usually, he didn't waste time on random encounters, especially ones as absurd as this. But something about her sincerity had struck a chord. Dylan quickly scrolled through his recent messages. His assistant, Grace, had sent a reminder about tomorrow's meeting with investors. The usual routine, endless negotiations, insincere smiles. He could easily go home and continue living in that predictable world. Yet, the thought of Hannah wouldn't leave him. "Grace," he typed a short message. "Find information on the veterinary clinic where Hannah Collins works." No questions. Grace responded almost immediately. "Of course. I'll let you know as soon as I find something." Dylan smirked. Connections in this city were a powerful weapon. He didn't know why he was doing this, but he wanted to see her again. Meanwhile, Hannah burst into her small apartment, slamming the door behind her. Olivia, sprawled on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea, raised an eyebrow. "So, how was the date?" she smirked. Still wearing her shoes, Hannah flopped down beside her. "You won't believe what I did." "What, was he a psycho?" "No. I mistook the wrong man. Can you imagine? I went up to the wrong guy." Hannah buried her face in her hands. Olivia laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "Oh my God, Hannah. That's classic. And how did he react?" Hannah sighed heavily. "He didn't tell me I was wrong. He played along. We had a great conversation. And then I saw a text from the real Mark and ran off." Olivia rolled her eyes. "And you didn't even leave your number?" "Olivia, were you even listening? I embarrassed myself in front of a stranger." Olivia grinned. "Maybe that stranger didn't tell you the truth on purpose. Maybe he liked talking to you." Hannah turned away, but something warm stirred inside her. That man truly did seem different. Not like the typical crowd in fancy restaurants. 2 days passed. Hannah thoughtfully arranged medical instruments on the sterile table in the clinic. Her mind kept drifting back to that evening. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message. "Good afternoon, Hannah. I hope I'm not being too forward. Would you mind meeting again?" "Dylan." Hannah froze. "What the—" she whispered, staring at the screen. "Everything okay?" a colleague asked. "Nothing. Just an old acquaintance texted." She didn't know how he got her number, but for some reason it didn't scare her. "How did you get my number?" she typed back. The response came quickly. "We have mutual acquaintances. Don't worry, I'm harmless. I just wanted to fix our strange first meeting." Hannah smiled, feeling a warm flutter in her stomach. "All right. Let's meet at the beach cafe in Santa Monica. Tomorrow at 6. She hit send and immediately regretted it. But it was too late. The next evening, Hannah stood at the entrance of a small cafe. The ocean quietly murmured behind her, and the sunset painted the sky in golden-pink hues. Dylan appeared, as if emerging from the shadows of the sunset. No suit. In dark jeans and a simple shirt, he seemed like a completely different person. Ordinary. Genuine. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said softly, smiling. Hannah nodded, trying to hide her slight nervousness. "Honestly, I was sure I'd never see you again. I rarely miss a chance to fix my mistakes." His smile grew warmer. They stepped into the cafe. The conversation flowed easily. Dylan barely spoke about work, only vaguely mentioning that he was in investments. That evening, he was simply Dylan. No titles. No pressure. He listened to Hannah's stories about rescued animals, volunteers, and the challenges of starting a shelter. And with every minute, he felt more drawn to her world. "You mentioned the animal center," he said thoughtfully. "Why not look for sponsors?" Hannah sighed. "I'm not good at asking for money. It's easier for me to treat cats and dogs than negotiate deals." Dylan smirked slightly. "Maybe you need someone who's good at negotiations." Hannah smiled, finally relaxing for the first time that evening. She didn't know who he really was. And for the first time in a long while, Dylan felt he wanted to stay just like this, a regular man who simply wanted to help. But a quiet sense of guilt began to stir inside him. He was hiding the truth. And that couldn't last forever. The night sky of Los Angeles stretched before Dylan like a shimmering ocean of lights. He stood by the massive panoramic window of his penthouse, gazing at the city that had long felt like it was under his control. Towering skyscrapers, the glimmering headlights of cars on sprawling highways, the restless, noisy metropolis. This was his familiar world. But tonight, that world felt empty. Red wine swirled slowly in his glass, yet he couldn't taste it, couldn't savor its aroma. His thoughts were consumed by Hannah. He recalled how she laughed while telling stories about a rescued puppy and how her eyes lit up when she spoke about her dream of opening a rehabilitation center for animals. She believed he was just an ordinary man. And he liked that. But Dylan wasn't ordinary. He set his glass down on the table and sighed. His phone buzzed, a message from Grace. "Mr. Hayes, the investors from Tokyo are awaiting confirmation for next week's meeting. Should I remind you about it tomorrow?" Dylan ran a hand over his face. Work, deals, investments. This was the world he had built for years. But now he felt the weight of the wall of lies growing between him and Hannah. He had lied to her, hidden who he really was. And now it was starting to weigh on him. Grace wouldn't approve of what he had done. She was always straightforward and knew how to calculate risks. And now the risk was too great. If the truth came out, Hannah likely wouldn't forgive him. Dylan picked up his phone, hesitating. Should he call her? Tell her everything now? No, not yet. He wasn't ready to lose her. Meanwhile, Hannah sat curled up in a warm blanket on the couch, a mug of tea in her hands. Olivia wasn't letting up. "So, do you like him?" her sister asked with a sly smirk. Hannah smiled, tilting her head slightly. "He's different." Not like anyone I've known before. And what makes him so different? I don't know. He seems simple, but at the same time, it feels like there's something more behind his words. Olivia laughed. Maybe he's a secret millionaire or a spy. Ha ha, very funny, Hannah scoffed. You watch too many movies. But Olivia's words lingered in her mind. Dylan was unusually confident, even in awkward situations. Like someone who was used to being in control. She brushed the thought aside, but deep down, a shadow of doubt began to settle. The next morning, Dylan arrived at his towering office building. Grace was already waiting in his office with a stack of documents. Dylan, we need to discuss the Singapore project. And also, are you really going to continue this with Hannah? He looked up at her. Why do you ask? Because your acting like this is just another matter of business, but I know you. You're not the type to let emotions dictate decisions. Dylan sighed heavily and sank into his chair. She thinks I'm someone else. I let her believe that. And now I don't know how to tell her the truth. Grace crossed her arms. And you think she'll take it well when she finds out you're Dylan Hayes, billionaire CEO of one of the largest investment firms? Dylan was silent. You know the truth will come out. The only question is when and how. If you don't tell her yourself, the consequences will be worse. He thought about it. Grace was right. But now wasn't the time. He needed to be ready. I'll think about it, he said quietly. Grace gave a silent nod and left the office. Meanwhile, Hannah was immersed in her usual work at the veterinary clinic. But thoughts of Dylan wouldn't leave her. At one point, she was scrolling through her newsfeed when an article about an upcoming economic forum caught her eye. Among the list of participants, a name seemed oddly familiar. Dylan Hayes, CEO of Hayes International Investment Group. Hannah froze. The photo in the article left no doubt. It was him. A chill ran down her spine. He lied to me, she whispered. And the sting of betrayal was sharper than she had expected. Hannah couldn't tear her eyes away from the phone screen. The name glared back at her. Dylan Hayes, CEO of Hayes International Investment Group. His photo beneath the headline left no doubt. This was the same man she had chatted with so easily in that cozy cafe, believing he was just an ordinary guy. Her heart pounded in her chest. Memories of every moment with Dylan flooded her mind like scenes from a movie. His light jokes, his sincere glances, and most of all, his silence. He had never told her the truth. Olivia. Hannah's voice trembled as she shot up from the couch. Olivia, sitting at her laptop, turned toward her. What happened? Hannah tossed the phone onto the couch so Olivia could see the screen. It's him. Dylan. A billionaire. A CEO. He lied to me. Olivia stared at the photo, wide-eyed. Wait. You're telling me that the guy you accidentally met is some top-tier businessman? Hannah paced the room anxiously. Not just some businessman. He owns an entire investment empire. And he never told me. This whole time, he was just playing with me. Olivia tried to calm her down. Maybe he wanted you to know him as a person, not as a billionaire? Olivia, that's manipulation. He knew I thought he was Mark. And instead of telling me the truth, he played along. Then he kept hiding who he really was. Olivia fell silent, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. So, what are you going to do? Hannah clenched her fists. I'm going to talk to him. In person. Dylan sat in his office, buried in documents, but his thoughts kept circling back to Hannah. He knew he couldn't hide the truth forever. He needed to come clean. His phone buzzed, jolting him. A message from Hannah. We need to talk. Today. Same cafe in Santa Monica. 6 p.m. Dylan frowned. Her message lacked the usual warmth that colored their conversations. He quickly replied, "Of course." I'll be there. The Santa Monica Cafe welcomed Dylan with its familiar cozy atmosphere. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow through the windows. He arrived early, hoping to gather his thoughts. But Hannah walked in exactly at 6. She was tense, her eyes cold. The trust that once sparkled in them was gone. "You lied to me this whole time," she said instead of a greeting. Dylan stood up to welcome her, but she didn't move closer. "Hannah, I wanted to tell you the truth. I swear." But what? You wanted to see how long I'd believe your game? Or were you afraid that if I knew who you really were, I'd treat you differently?" Dylan clenched his jaw. "Yes, I was afraid. You're the first person who saw me as something other than a businessman. I liked that. Liked that." Hannah let out a quiet, bitter laugh, but pain laced her voice. "You let me believe we were equals, that you understood my dreams, my fears. And now I see, you're a man used to manipulating people." "That's not true." Dylan stepped forward, but she backed away. "I truly wanted to help you with your center. This wasn't a game." Hannah met his eyes directly. "Help me or buy my trust." Her words struck Dylan like a blow. "I didn't want you to find out this way. I was going to tell you." "But you didn't," she cut him off. "Do you know what hurts the most? I actually felt good with you. I trusted you. And now I can't believe a single word you say." A heavy silence hung between them. "Goodbye, Dylan," Hannah said quietly, turning to leave. Dylan stood frozen, watching her walk away. He realized he had lost her. And this time, no amount of money could fix it. Dylan sat in his luxurious penthouse, but the walls felt suffocating, and the luxury around him seemed meaningless. The city beyond the windows pulsed with life, yet he felt like he was drowning at the bottom of a cold ocean. Every second of their last conversation replayed in his mind. Hannah had walked away, and he hadn't been able to explain that his feelings for her had been genuine. Dylan had never truly known the taste of defeat. In business, he was used to winning, calculating moves, controlling outcomes. But this was different. He couldn't buy back trust. Money and status couldn't bring Hannah back. He rose from his chair and began pacing the room, his mind racing. He had to do something. Something real. Then it hit him. "You dream of opening a rehabilitation center for animals." Her words echoed in his mind like a lifeline in a storm. Dylan couldn't earn back her trust with words, but he could with action. "Grace," he called, dialing his assistant. "Yes, Dylan?" Her voice was calm as always. "Find me an abandoned building or a property that can be converted into an animal rehabilitation center. Immediately. And get in touch with the best architects. It needs to be designed in her style." Grace hesitated. "You want to build a center for Miss Collins?" "No. I want to help her make her dream a reality. But she can't find out it's from me." Grace sighed softly. "Understood. I'm on it." Weeks passed. Hannah was heading home after a long day at the clinic. Thoughts of Dylan still haunted her. She kept telling herself that the disappointment had passed, but her heart still ached with a dull pain. Her phone buzzed. "Come to this address. I think you'll find it interesting." Anonymous. Hannah frowned. An unknown number. A strange message. But curiosity got the better of her. When she arrived at the given address, confusion washed over her. In front of her stood an old building, fully restored. A large sign above the entrance read, "Hannah Collins Animal Rehabilitation Center." She stood frozen, unable to move. The door quietly opened, and a middle-aged woman approached her with a warm smile. "Are you Hannah?" "Yes." "What is this?" "This is your center. Everything was designed based on your ideas. There are kennels, a medical wing, rehabilitation areas, and even a small garden for the animals to walk. Who did this? The woman handed her an envelope. Everything is explained here. Hannah's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter. Hannah, I couldn't explain to you then how much every minute spent with you meant to me. I made a mistake by hiding who I truly was. I won't ask for forgiveness because I know words mean nothing. But I hope this center helps make your dream come true. And maybe, just maybe, it gives me a chance to show you that I was sincere. Dylan. The letter slowly fell to her side. Through the glass wall of the building, she saw a veterinarian examining a dog. It looked exactly how she had once dreamed it would. Hannah stepped outside, feeling a lump form in her throat. And there, in the distance, she saw Dylan. He stood still, not moving closer, giving her space. His eyes were filled with quiet hope and anticipation. Their eyes met. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. And then, Hannah took the first step. Dylan stood at a distance, unable to take a step closer. His heart pounded in his chest, much like it did before closing an important deal, but this was entirely different. It wasn't the thrill of risk or fear of losing money. It was the fear of losing something that had become more important than anything else. Hannah slowly walked toward him. Her steps were cautious, but the cold distrust in her eyes was gone. She stopped just a few feet away, tightly gripping the letter in her hands. "Do you really think this will fix everything?" Her voice was quiet but free of anger. Dylan sighed, lowering his gaze. "No. I know I can't rebuild the trust one broke. But I wanted to prove that this was never a game to me. I'm not buying your forgiveness. This center, this is your dream. I just helped make it real." Hannah glanced thoughtfully at the building behind him. Everything was perfect. Exactly how she had envisioned her sanctuary for rescued animals. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start?" Dylan closed his eyes for a moment. "I was afraid. You were the first person who saw me as a man, not a billionaire. And I liked being just Dylan, not a name on business pages. But then, I got too caught up in it and missed the right moment to come clean." A heavy silence followed. Hannah sighed. "I don't know if I can trust you again. But I see that you didn't just walk away. And that means something." Dylan gave a quiet nod. "I won't rush you. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here." Hannah slowly nodded. "Let's start with you showing me the center?" For the first time in a long while, Dylan smiled sincerely. "Of course." Months passed. The Hannah Collins Animal Rehabilitation Center became more than just a building. It became a place of hope. Stray and injured animals were treated and cared for there. Charity events were held, and volunteers filled its halls with life. Dylan wasn't just the man who helped open the center. He became actively involved. He organized events, brought in sponsors, and even spent time working with the animals. For the first time in years, he felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with money. He and Hannah slowly grew closer. Trust was rebuilt gradually, step by step. Dylan no longer hid any part of his life, and Hannah was learning to trust again. They spent time together at the center, discussing new projects and caring for animals side by side. Dylan supported her in every endeavor, never missing a chance to stand by her. Then came the day they opened a new wing of the center, a large facility for rehabilitating wild animals. Guests, volunteers, and sponsors gathered for the celebration. Hannah stood before them, giving a heartfelt speech of gratitude. As the ceremony ended, Dylan stepped onto the stage. "There's something I'd like to say." The crowd quieted. Hannah looked at him in surprise. Dylan turned toward her and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Opening it, he revealed a ring. "Hannah, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But every moment with you has made me a better man. You inspire me to become the person I've always wanted to be." Let me walk this path with you. Will you marry me? Silence filled the room. Hannah looked at him, at the ring, and at the center they had built together. And then she smiled. Yes. Applause erupted. Months later, they were married right there at the center, surrounded by those for whom it had all been built: rescued animals, volunteers, and close friends. Dylan and Hannah stood beneath a flower-adorned arch, while puppies and kittens roamed freely around them. Their union became a symbol that even the most difficult situations could lead to strength and happiness. And now, their life was filled with love, trust, and kindness.